Hello again, and welcome back to Illegally Cited. This is Jesse, and I am back for part two of the whole which operating system is right for me assistive technology series. Because, again, if you guys didn't watch the computer one, just a quick overview for people. This is at least a two-part series so far. In the last video, I talked a lot about what to consider for computer accessibility. There's no right or wrong answer. There's no like this is definitively the best computer or best smartphone or tablet or whatever. Windows is the best, Mac is the best, Android or iPhone is the best. Um, there's a lot more to consider, whether you're blind or low vision. And in the last video, I went through a lot of stuff. Built-in accessibility features, price, what you're using it for, um, third-party options, just loads of different things. So check that video out if you haven't already. But in this video, we're going to continue and we're going to talk about mobile. And we're going to concentrate on iOS and Android. And I do have both Android and iOS devices. So, I've been using both. Now, I use iPhone or iOS, iPad as my daily driver. So, that is my primary platform. But I do have and have used several Android devices in the past and right now. Just go look at my hardware review playlist. I've got reviews for iPhones. I've got reviews for Windows tablets, Android tablets, Android phones. I've been using a couple of Pixel phones the last several years. I've reviewed a couple of Nexus 7 tablets. So yeah, I use iOS regularly, but I do tinker with Android a fair bit as well. So again, just like computer accessibility, there really isn't a definitive winner for blind low vision accessibility on mobile. I have my preference, and in some cases, I would definitely lean people toward one or the other. But both have become quite usable and quite accessible. So I want to start with Android, and I'm going to say that the cool thing about Android is you have a lot more openness. You have a lot more customization capability. If you're a nerd and you really want to get in there and customize your home screen, customize how your phone behaves, even run different launchers so your phone looks and behaves a little bit differently as long as it works with your magnifier or your TalkBack or screen reader, you can use that. There's so much customization that you can do with an Android phone that you can't really do on an iPhone or an iPad right now. Thankfully, Apple is becoming a little bit more open. I remember one of my biggest annoyances early on was like it was such a pain to basically get files back and forth to and from an iPhone. And now at least we have the Files app, which it's not perfect, but it helps significantly. And I'll try to remember to talk more about that when we talk about iOS. But like Android, you can plug it into your computer. It shows up as as like a removable drive. You can copy stuff back and forth to it. It's great. You have so much more customization. Now, on the flip side, if you are not as much of a techie user and you want things to just sort of work, I would really say that iOS probably offers an easier experience to get started with. There's a little bit more consistency in its behaviors and its gestures, and just I think it's a little smoother learning experience than Android. Android, you also have to worry about the fragmentation issue, both in updates and what features your device supports. It's not as bad as it used to be, but it's still frustrating. So, you know, uh, an Android device, as far as upgrades go, like, oh, I buy an Android device, how many new operating system upgrades can I get? If Android version 12, 13, 14, whatever comes out, how many years is my device going to be supported, or even with security updates? For a long time, you had the issue of like, oh, well, I get a new device and it only got supported for the next Android version, and then it just really wasn't supported anymore. And for a while, it was really frustrating because I would get a lot of people coming in who would have these older Android devices because they were cheaper. And when magnification first came out to Android, I believe you had to have like version 4.1, and a lot of people were topped out at version 4. Their phones only supported up to Android 4. And so when Google would introduce new Android versions that happened to also include some really nice accessibility features, people were left in the dark and like, well, the only choice I have is to really update my phone and get an all new device because I can't even get this upgrade. Now, of course, that happens in iOS as well, but I mean, iOS 18 is coming out later this fall, and you can still use an iOS 10 series with iOS 18. Now, you're not going to get your AI features and some of the new whiz-bang features, but if you've had a phone and it's for what you need it for, it's working fine, you could still use a 10, a 10, a 10s Max, whatever. It probably will run a little slower, but it'll work. And we're looking at the iPhone 16 will be out this fall. So that's 6 versions. That's actually really good. And that's not even counting like you have S years. You have like the 13, the 13S or 12S. What? So I don't even remember how many generations it's been, but it's been a fair few years since the 10 series is out. Pixel phones are generally supported maybe a little bit longer. They are directly from Google. They have, the core. If you have features of an Android operating system, you're going to get them first, probably. You're going to get, the core Google experience. So you'll have TalkBack, you'll have the magnification gestures, and all of the accessibility features that also come with Android. Samsung is also the big other third party. Like I know there are other ones. I don't even remember. I mean, there's so many different Android. I won't name them all, but like there's so many manufacturers that make Android devices. But I would say probably Pixel and Samsung are the most popular manufacturers. Now, Samsung can be really cool, but they have their own unique quirks too. They like to kind of put their own extras and spin on Android. So they kind of have their own flavor of TalkBack. Now, if you're nerdy and you understand that, and you understand like how to go to the Play Store and download the Google version of TalkBack and then enable that instead of the Samsung one, you can do it. But again, for a lot of people, I just wouldn't even want to begin to try to teach them how to do those types of things. So again, on the good and the bad, you have a really cool customization features. You can use Samsung stuff. You can use Google stuff. But if you don't want to tinker that much, you just want to turn it on and have it work. That's kind of a thing to consider. The other thing is where your accessibility settings are depends on the brand of phone that you have. So again, your Pixel devices, you're generally going to go into the settings app, you're going to go under accessibility, and you're going to find your features listed there. But again, depending on the brand that you have, they may call some accessibility features, they may name them slightly differently. They may arrange the settings differently. Like on some devices, you go under accessibility and boom, there's your accessibility features. Some devices have additional submenus where you have to go onto visual settings or hearing settings, and then you'll find certain settings that are dealing with those topics. I even learned something I hadn't seen before during the interview or the panel that we did on Next Gen Access. Cheap plug. I will put a link in the description below for that. Um, I was talking with the panel there, and one of the other panel members said, "Yeah, well, and sometimes there's a few devices where to find even accessibility settings, you have to go to additional settings. Like if there's not even just a blanket accessibility thing, you have to go under additional settings and then accessibility. So it's really buried in there. So that can be especially if you're trying to help somebody, you're like, well, what phone do you have? What settings do you see? What are they called? I can pick up any model iPhone or iPad and be like, okay, go under accessibility, go under voiceover, or go under spoken content or whatever it is. And it's pretty much going to be in the same spot. It's going to be called the exact same thing. So it's a lot more straightforward and it's a lot easier to kind of help people and get them started. So that's kind of a thing to consider. Another positive thing that Android has is their low vision support, their magnification support is really good. I actually much prefer the way that Android does it over iOS. So in Android, there are other ways that you can set it up, like with a shortcut button or whatever, but like the default way, you can turn on magnification gestures and then you triple tap the screen. You just tap, tap, tap with one finger, and then it turns the magnifier on. And then you can literally pinch to zoom. A lot of people are familiar with pinch to zoom because in like Chrome or Safari, you can just pinch to zoom on a mobile device and the web page will zoom in and out. But there's a lot of apps that don't support pinch to zoom natively. So if you want to use magnification, in a lot of cases, you can't. But just like Windows Magnifier or something like that, the magnification gestures on Android, you do that triple tap, you turn it on, you pinch to zoom as big as you need, you pan around the screen, and then you triple tap again, you turn it off, boom, life is good. I really like the way that's implemented. And iOS, they have a zoom feature, but I don't like their gestures near as much. They do a double tap with 3 fingers to turn zoom on and off, which I don't necessarily mind. But the way you zoom in and out is just clunky and kind of stupid if you want to know my real opinion. Because you double tap and hold, like you double tap and then you drag up and down with 3 fingers to zoom in and out. Now, I can do that fine. I'm used to it. I know how to do it. It's not a problem. But that is one of, if not the most annoying things to try to teach somebody how to do. I mean, if you're like a fairly tech savvy person and can figure things out, or you catch on to things pretty quickly, it's not too bad. But somebody who's new to technology, maybe just lost their vision, or is older and maybe they don't, somebody who just doesn't really want to use a lot of technology, they just want to use what they need it for and get out of there, get done. That whole 3-finger gesture thing is just, again, it's clunky at best. And it's very hard to get some people to figure out how to learn that. Even, like I said, most people are familiar with pinch to zoom. And I wish they would adopt that on iOS. I'll talk a little bit about that again when in iOS, but let's stick to Android here. So Android, their magnification gestures are actually quite good. TalkBack has also gotten significantly better. I remember when I got my first Nexus 7, it was cool that TalkBack did talk and it did work, but the gestures were, I would say, so inconsistent. They responded half the time. You would do a simple flick gesture or a double tap or something, and sometimes it would work, sometimes it didn't seem like it caught the gesture. You had these weird L-shaped gestures that, again, like, I figured them out. But again, if you were like trying to teach a new or very inexperienced technology user, these weird L-shaped and other weird gestures, they were maybe not the most intuitive for some people. And I think really in the beginning they were trying to differentiate themselves, like, well, we're not going to just blatantly copy the exact gestures that iOS did. But now in the latest versions of Android, TalkBack has you can still do a lot of those L gestures, but they've also included other gestures that can kind of do a lot of your similar things. So they're a little bit more similar to iOS. And I think people might be able to understand some of those a little bit better. And then they have the TalkBack menu, which you just do a gesture, you pull up a little TalkBack menu, and then you can basically choose the thing that you want to do from a menu. So they've cleaned things up. They've made things a bit more responsive. They've made it even more customizable, but I think they've made it a little bit easier to use than it used to be. So that's good. I don't know. There's still, and again, we talked about this in the Windows or in the computer operating system video. Price is a factor, and I know a lot of people get Android devices because, yes, iPhones are expensive. Even a cheaper iPhone is kind of spendy. And you can get Android phones for, $200, $300, $400. Again, I'm going to say the same type of thing that I did for the computers. You get what you pay for. And in a lot of cases, especially on mobile, I would not recommend that you guys or that people get the bottom bargain basement Android device. Yeah, the Nexus 7 tablets, they were like, what, $200 back in the day? They were cheap, and they were neat little things to play around with. They kind of worked. They did okay. But the quality of their touchscreen was not great. I think a large part of that was like low memory resources or how they use the memory, but I think also a part of it was their touchscreens just weren't as good and responsive as higher end Android devices. Later on, I got a Samsung tablet, had an OLED screen, it had a much better touchscreen, and going from my Nexus to that Samsung Android tablet, it was night and day difference. Like, there would still be little oddities here and there, but it was like performing your common gestures was so much more responsive. And I didn't have near the problems that I did with the Nexus trying to consistently get things to work or respond correctly. So yeah, it might look that $200 phone might look appealing, but you may have an inferior touchscreen. You may have a lot less memory in your machine, whether it's storage for apps or just RAM/memory, the stuff that you need really to make things run smoothly. I talked about this in the computer video again, where an average sighted person will say, oh, well, this is a cheap phone and it actually runs really well. Well, that might be, but that's a sighted person who can just open up Chrome, open up any old app and look at it visually and tap, tap, tap away. But if you are using magnification. And especially if you're using a screen reader on mobile like TalkBack or VoiceOver, you want at least a mid-range phone. You want something that has, like 8 gigs of RAM or 6 gigs of RAM, whatever it is these days. I don't remember what the average for Android is, but you don't want something bargain basement, because not only are you running all of the apps that you would want to run as an average user, but you are running in the background magnification, text to speech, your screen reader. That all takes extra resources. So, if I open up my Gmail or if I open up Chrome or whatever, I'm not just running those apps. Your device also has to process and has to be able to efficiently run that screen reader in the background so that you don't have lag, so that you don't have unresponsiveness, so that you actually can smoothly and effectively just navigate your device. And I can't tell you how many people have come in with these really cheap Android devices, and like I said, I will try to help them, and I play with it a little bit myself and go, oh boy, I really hate to be the bearer of bad news for you, but it's really your device that is very low end, and that's, again, it just doesn't have the resources that it needs to run your assistive technology. So that can happen. That's why, like I said, the Pixel phones are actually a pretty good mid-range phone. You get, right now we're up to, what is it, the Pixel 7-ish, I think. I've got a Pixel 5, and it still runs reasonably well. But they're reasonably affordable. And they have a pretty good, performance. They're pretty good. Now, what I used to also say as far as accessibility for Android goes, well, actually, before we even get to that, the other thing that I have to touch on is Braille accessibility. And from what I understand, it's gotten better. Admittedly, I don't do a lot with refreshable Braille displays and computers and phones. I have used Braille displays a fair bit with my iPhone and a fair bit with the computer. But until recently, this is one area, if you really, really rely on refreshable Braille, I don't know if I really don't know if I would recommend an Android device for you right now. It's getting better, but especially until recently, Android's Braille support, they used to have this thing called BrailleBack, and now everything is sort of combined into this Google Accessibility Suite, like your BrailleBack, your TalkBack, your whatever. And Braille support has gotten better, but I still don't know. Again, not having used it recently myself much, I can't speak to the compatibility and how smoothly it works with a lot of your common Braille displays. I know they're working on it, but that has been traditionally a spot where Android has fallen or has been behind in iOS is Braille support for sure. So if you rely a lot on Braille, or maybe you're deafblind and that's your main access, you really, really need that Braille, I would still probably recommend iOS at this point for that. Now, the other thing that I have to talk about is apps. And for a while, again, Android was kind of behind in app support, especially for assistive technology style apps. Because, remember, iOS came out with their VoiceOver for iPhone in 2007. And I remember when I started my current job in 2010, I think they were on like Android 1.5, 1.6, and I love their dessert naming scheme that they used to use. It was like donut and cupcake, and that's when I came into Android. And back then, even you literally had to have devices that would have remember the ones that have the slide out keyboards and have physical arrow keys on them? They didn't even fully support touchscreen devices well right away. But eventually they did, and they got way better. Um, but because as far as mobile devices go, after Mobile Speak kind of died for Windows Mobile died. Because when they went from Windows Phone, they went from Windows Mobile 6 to Windows Mobile 7. Windows Mobile 7 just totally dropped any support for accessibility. They really didn't have much as far as built-in accessibility. Um, and Mobile Speak didn't work anymore, and that's what I used before the iPhone. I used Mobile Speak Pocket and Mobile Geo. Um, but because blind and low vision users were flocking to iPhones because that's where the accessibility was, third-party developers, whether it was an OCR app or a GPS app or reading apps, whatever, they would typically release on iOS only or iOS first because that's where their audience was. That's who, people were snapping up iPhones like crazy, iPhones and iPads. Um, and then again, if you were lucky, then for a while, then you would get an Android port eventually. Um, but even some of those ports were often behind the iOS version. And like I said, for a while there were some apps that just weren't available on iOS or on Android for the longest time. I'm trying to remember when Seeing AI came out, like 2015, 2016. That didn't become available literally until like late 2023, I think is when it finally hit Android. It was right around the time that Be My Eyes, the Be My AI thing came out, I think. And yeah, so Seeing AI, that took. I honestly gave up for a while. I'm like, there's no way. If they haven't released it in like 5 years, there's no way it's going to even come to Android at this point. But out of the blue, oh, by the way, Seeing AI is on Android now. And there were a couple of other apps like that were only available on iOS. Now, there were alternatives, like for Seeing AI, you had Envision AI that were on both. Um, Voice Dream Reader was on both, and I love that app. If you follow the channel for a while, you will know that. But the Android version was lacking and is still, I think, a little bit behind the iOS version in some of its features and functionality. Because after developing it for a short while, the original creator of Voice Dream Reader, he just didn't like developing. He found it harder to develop for Android, and so he subcontracted that out to another developer for the Android port. And now it's called Ledger Reader, Legere, Ledger Reader or Ledger Scanner. So they are out there, but they're, um, I don't know if they're quite as up to date as the iOS version, let's say. But in the last year or two, especially, Android is a lot more, I would say, a lot more equal as far as app support, because there are quite a few more people switching to, or using Android these days. TalkBack has gotten better. You have Seeing AI, you have Envision, you have Be My Eyes, you have apps to read Bookshare books or Bard books. Bard has been there for a while. You have like your NFB Newsline. You have all of those types of things that are on both platforms. So I would say, especially in the last year or so, Android has gotten a lot more equal or closer to iOS as far as third-party app support. Maybe not quite as many games, accessible games out there. I know there are quite a few, but I think there's still a little bit more of those also coming to iOS. So that is Android. Now iOS, again, this is my primary mobile platform. I came into iOS, my first iOS device was the iPad 2 in 2011? So I did not join iOS for a while because, yeah, I wanted to play with iOS. But you remember, it was only available on AT&T. And where I lived at the time, you really wanted to have Verizon just because the network for it was better and I could get a connection in more areas. So I didn't want to switch to a GSM provider. I wanted to keep my Verizon. And my original thought was, well, let me see if, because I had Mobile Speak Pocket on a Windows mobile phone, and that was working fine for me overall for what I was using it for. But I thought, okay, the iPad 2, it's got a camera on it now. Now that camera was terrible in retrospect, but it was a camera. But my thought was, okay, I don't know if I really want to switch my phone out yet, but I want to know what this voiceover thing is about for personal and for work, so I can, when people ask about it for my, through my day job as an assistive technology specialist, I could be more competent, because at the time, 2010, 11, I really didn't know much about Apple. I knew that the accessibility was there. I knew that it was pretty decent, but that's really what I knew. I didn't really know how to use it. And so around 2011, 2012 is when I really started learning iOS and even the Mac. So I got an iPad 2 thinking, well, I can use, if it's got a camera, I can use it as a CCTV. It's got a bigger screen, so not only can I use VoiceOver, but I can use its built-in zoom feature to magnify. And so, yeah, and then of course there was the thing, there was a few games that were coming out that I really wanted to play that were exclusive to iOS. Like, anybody remember Rage? Anybody remember Rage, the PC game and whatever, but then they had the Rage HD for mobile. I'm like, oh, that looks so cool. And so I bought an iPad and I started using it. I used it for the internet. I played games with it. I used VoiceOver and found out I really liked it. I got hooked on streaming services like Pandora and just being able to watch like Netflix and things. I'm like, okay, this is pretty cool. And then the iPhone 4S came out that year. Siri was a thing. Other carriers, so we could get it on Verizon now finally, and so I got it. And I, I hate to say it, but I never looked back. It's like, man, Windows Mobile Speak was really cool for what it was back in the day. But yeah, okay, I got to admit there was something about this iOS thing that um, really was cool. Because I had the iPad and it was like, well, I love all these things that use the internet, but the problem is, like, I'm on the bus or I'm out somewhere not at home or at work. I can't use those things because I don't have internet. But if I had a phone, now I can use my, like, Pandora and whatever anywhere. And so that's what I did. I got the iPhone 4S and kind of like I said, never went back. They finally, in like iPhone 6, they got the larger screen, the plus size phones, which I've been waiting for forever. So I jumped on that, and then eventually, and I don't even remember what iOS version it was, where they finally introduced dark mode. That was huge. And then, like I said, on all those things we had, that's where all these assistive technology apps came out first. Right now, you can get loads of apps that will do object recognition, OCR for text documents, any number of things, and they're free or dirt cheap. But back in, like, I don't know, 2013-ish, 2014, I don't remember, KNFB Reader came out for the iPhone, and it was $100. And now people would be having hissy fits. I mean, people would be just completely losing their minds. Back then, man, we were happy to pay it. Like, oh wait, you mean I got to spend $100, but like I can take a picture of something and instantly have it read aloud and not have to rely on someone to read it for me? Um, that was huge. I remember, the Bookshare Read to Go, and then I remember getting hooked on Voice Dream Reader. I've been a huge, huge fan of that app ever since. And then we had things like, the barcode reader, the money reader, and then Seeing AI came out, and that was a huge thing. Seeing AI was huge. We had Kindle support. Um, and now we have all of this stuff on both Android and iOS. So what I would say is, like I said, everything that I said about Android is pretty much the same for iOS as far as like, you maybe don't want to get the older model phones. You don't want to go too old. Um, like let's say you can't get the latest and greatest phone because it is expensive. If you go even like a year back or so, that's maybe not too bad. But I wouldn't go, like, oh, like let's say the iPhone 15 is the current version. I don't, if somebody was selling like an iPhone 11 or 10 or something, I wouldn't go that old. Like, I would maybe go like a 14 is about the oldest that I would go back right now. Because again, you may be saving money now, but again, remember earlier when I talked about like you can go from the iPhone 10, you can go from like whatever iOS was back then all the way up to now, several years later. Um, the newer you can get, the longer your device will be supported. So if you went and bought, like, let's say, an iPhone 10 or 11 now, odds are you would be in the market for another phone within the next year or so because Apple will drop support for it probably in iOS 19 or something. So, I mean, what I will say is that, at least even if you get like an iPhone SE, the newest version of the SE, it does lack some of the camera features. It does lack some of the extra memory and a couple little bits and bobs here and there, but you're at least going to get a base level of experience. Your touchscreen is still going to be very responsive. VoiceOver is still going to run pretty well. You still shouldn't have much of a problem there. You don't have near the gap in like your low end devices and high end devices where like, you get the $200 Android phone and the touchscreen on it is just absolutely terrible. Um, Even the lower end iPhones will have a base level of performance usually, so it's not too bad. And then, you go up from there. Um, and a lot of people will say like, oh, well, I don't need the pro level camera. I don't need this, that, and the other thing. Um, but even going from like the iPhone 10 to the 13, the 10s Max to the 13 Pro Max, which is what I have now, I immediately noticed a difference in the performance and being able to focus when I use the magnifier app with the camera. Like it would just focus, like because before you would kind of point at something and it would take a second, and sometimes you had to like move it away and then move it back, and then it was like, oh, okay, I guess I'm going to refocus. And with the 13 Pro Max, it's actually still really quite good. Um, I can point it at something, and it generally autofocuses pretty quickly and pretty well. And from what little I've used, even with I have a 14 Pro Max through work as my work phone, and I even notice a little bit of camera improvement from that. So when I eventually probably upgrade to the iPhone 16 later this year, 16 Pro Max more than likely, I'm sure I'm going to notice a huge jump in camera responsiveness and quality, even compared to my 13 Pro Max that I have now. So that's going to be useful for not just magnification, but even for OCR, object recognition. Look at all these AI apps now. You have Be My Eyes, you have Envision Assistant coming out hopefully soon. I'm beta testing that right now. Ira and all these other things that are starting to incorporate AI, Seeing AI, Envision AI. Blind people can end up using the camera a lot. So yeah, we just like everybody else, we want to have a pretty good camera too. Um, and as far as learning the devices, again, kind of going back to Android, you don't have as much customization as Android out of the box. Now, people can jailbreak still. I don't even know if jailbreaking is much of a thing these days. I know it used to be very popular. I even considered it briefly, but kind of just found it to be more of a pain than what it was worth, and so I never ended up doing it. But like I said, in the last couple of years, Apple has sort of started unlocking their phone a little bit more, like letting users customize things a little bit. Like the Files app was really huge, being able to, use cloud services like Dropbox or Google Drive or iCloud and put things in the Files app and whatever. And then in iOS, was it 16 or 17, where you can actually download files directly through the web browser, which is actually a simple thing that you wish would have been there years ago, but has actually really helped a lot. Like I can't tell you how many times I wanted to download a file, digital magazine or something, and I can just go into Safari from an email message, tap the download link, plop it into my Files app, and then push it over to VoiceDream or whatever app I want to use it in. And it's been better. Now, the one thing I talked about Android, just you hook it up to your computer, it looks like a removable drive. That's great. And I really, really wish that iOS would do that, allow that on Windows especially. I understand if you don't want to have the whole device as a removable drive, but to me, whatever folder structure you have available in your Files app is what Windows should see as a removable drive. Because if I could just literally plug my phone in and not have to use iCloud or iTunes or all this bull honky, and if I could just plug in and it shows the section of my phone that is the Files app, I can create new folders, I can copy files from my phone to my computer or from my computer to my phone. I would love that. And I really wish they would, but we'll see. So, like I said, some people may not like some of, they kind of think Apple has this kind of draconian control over everything, and they kind of do. But with all these, the EU and all their laws and even some stuff happening in the United States here, Apple is kind of almost being forced to allow more choices, allow more freedom and customization and functionality that it traditionally really wanted to lock down. So it's going to be interesting to see what they even, because iOS 18, they're even talking about opening things up even more, like being able to even adjust your home screen. You can add and remove and put widgets anywhere you want to. You don't have to stick to putting it in an order on the grid. You can put them all around the border if you want to, so you can see the middle of your wallpaper. Little things like that. But I don't know. It's not as much of a thing as it used to be. But what I would say is, again, think about if you're a new technology user, a new smartphone user, and especially if you, like I said, you just want to use your phone for what you need it for. You're not a huge nerd. You don't want to dive into all this techie and geeky stuff. I would say iPhone is probably the better device right now, because again, I think that VoiceOver, it just works more fluidly, a little more consistently. Um, and even then, there's even a bit more customization. Like I've added a few custom gestures in the last couple of versions of iOS that I use on a daily basis. It's great. Um, all of your settings are going to appear in the same spot. You go from a phone to a tablet, whatever. They're always under accessibility. They're always under your settings app. They're always under accessibility, and boom, they're just going to be in the same thing. They're going to be called the same thing. So again, there's just that level of consistency. Braille support, I would also, again, if you really do rely on refreshable Braille, I would say iOS right now is still the better bet. They have had some mishaps in the past for certain. There was, I forget what version of iOS it was, but they had a period of time where they broke compatibility for a set of Braille displays for a good, I don't know if it was a couple months or something like that, which was a big problem, and hopefully that doesn't happen again, and I hope they learn from it. But for the most part, like I said, I've used Braille more with iOS and have found it to be a pretty good experience. I've used several Braille displays through work. I have one of the e-readers from NLS that I play with on the iPhone still, and that works really well. So Braille support is actually pretty good. And then your apps, we talked about it on Android, but like I said, a lot of your accessible apps and a lot of your accessible games, a lot of your kind of utilities, like they come out to iOS first in a lot of cases because they know still that's where a lot of your blind low vision audience is. And so there's a lot of support there. AppleVis is a great community website. AppleVis, AppleVis.com is a very active online resource. They have an app directory. They have forums where people can ask questions. And like I said, the thing is, it's very active. It's very current. I'm always learning about new apps and things that come out. Android does have a similar type of website. It's called Inclusive Android, inclusiveandroid.com. I don't follow that one as closely, and I don't know if that one is updated as currently or how active it is compared to AppleVis, but that is another resource for Android. But that is, like I said, I would be lost without my iPhone. I use my computer all the time, but I mean, think about it. Like in the palm of your hand, whether you have Android or iOS, we can read almost any book. We can snap a picture and have a document or item read to us. We can have objects identified. We can get detailed visual descriptions now using AI, and that's going to get better. Travel things like, again, for both Android and iOS, mainstream apps that everybody else uses, and this is what I also tell people during tech assessments at work. It's not just the blindness and low vision apps that are out there. It's the third-party apps. Something simple like shopping on Amazon or checking my bank balance, going through my, looking at my bank statement on my app, on my mobile app, paying my bills, grocery delivery. I love Instacart. It's wonderful. Uber and Lyft. I was terrified that Uber and Lyft were going to be leaving the Twin Cities here. And thankfully they came to a resolution on it and we're going to keep them. But I use those a fair bit. I can't tell you how invaluable that stuff is. So what a lot of people, like your average non-disabled user, takes for granted as a convenience, I would say, are more of a necessity for us. And I also say technology isn't going to solve all of our problems, but it definitely helps. And while we're talking about, like, one thing I forgot to mention about iOS, it's got the built-in voiceover, but it also has the built-in zoom. I talked about I'm glad that zoom is there, but I don't like the gesture. I wish they would just change it to I don't care if it's the same as Android. I don't care if it's like a one finger triple tap or if they use a different gesture, but maybe making it a more straightforward gesture for new users. And then for the love of God, just make it once zoom is on, make it pinch to zoom. Like I know apps like Safari and Mail and things you can pinch to zoom, but let's say that all you would have to do really is to say, hey, magnifier is running or zoom is running in the background. We're taking over. Your browser pinch to zoom is going to be essentially disabled while zoom is active. And instead, pinch to zoom is going to be handled by the zoom magnifier feature. And then I would be able to use it system-wide, just like it would on iOS. Because, like I said, I know how to do it. I can do it fine. But those three-finger gestures are super clunky, and they are very hard to teach to other people in a lot of cases. And I do love that Apple has included a magnifier app that does turn your phone into a CCTV, And I must say that it works very well. And I'm excited to see that it's getting more interesting new features in iOS 18. Not entirely sure what that's all going to be yet, but I already love it in iOS 17, and it sounds like it's going to get better in iOS 18. Google does have a magnifier app, but I don't think it's natively included yet. I think you just have to go to the Play Store and download it. And of course, there are third-party magnifier apps for both operating systems as well. But, like I said, just having it built in right to the system, I can launch it from a shortcut or from Siri or from the system tray, which is how I do it. Or not the system tray, the control center. It's just a really, really good experience. So I know both of these videos have been very long, but I wanted to dive, thank you to Sam from The Blind Life for inspiring me to do this type of video, because these are the type of questions that I get all the time through work, through social media, through comments, through any number of different things. And so hopefully these two videos will help answer some of your current questions on, what platform or what operating system is right for me. Hope you guys enjoyed the videos. Give it a like if you did. Please feel free to share it with anyone you might find it helpful, a professional, friend or family member, other vision impaired user. But I hope it helps people. Give the video a like if you did. Follow me on Twitter at BGFH79, twitch.tv/illegally-sighted, illegally-sighted.com, and right here on YouTube. Until next time, I will chat with everybody again later.